to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Straight and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. Artificial intelligence, generative AI, and now agentic AI. The world of artificial intelligence is changing fast, and keeping up with the changes, let alone the changing terminology, can leave organizations struggling to find the right solutions. Today on the Talking Supply Chain podcast, we're going to try and clear up some of that confusion. Hello, and welcome to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Straight, and I'm glad you've chosen to take a few minutes with us to learn more about AI today. Kevin Frechette, CEO of Fairmarkit, is here to help us on that journey as we kind of explore the world of AI. So, Kevin, welcome to the podcast. It's great to talk to you on this topic.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, Brian. Should be a fun one.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I said, a lot of terminology out there. Before we kind of dive into the world of AI, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Fairmarkit for our audience that may not be familiar with what you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. There's a lot of buzzwords thrown out there. So if at any point, please stop me. Sometimes we use like the word pineapple if I go too deep. So just throw in a pineapple if needed, and we'll slow it down a little bit. But so my name's Kevin Frechette, co-founder and CEO of Fairmarkit. We've been around for about 8 years now. We're an AI-powered sourcing platform. So we help companies competitively source what they're looking to buy at scale. We've raised about 80 million over the last like 7-8 years. Partner with customers like Boeing, BP, Goodyear, Snowflake, essentially just helping them drive to different business outputs like cost savings, turnaround time reduction, risk reduction. And what's been cool the last 2 years is there's been a very, very heavy push to iterate with those customers from a Gen AI and then now an agentic standpoint. So, and this is kind of good timing for this podcast because we're recording on Valentine's Day, and my first agentic purchase ever was I bought flowers for my wife using OpenAI's operator agent. So they should be coming today, and we'll see if it panned out or not.
Well, hopefully it's delivered, and maybe don't tell her that you had some help from AI, right?
Yeah, that makes it a little less romantic. Although we'll probably throw it on socials, just why not? But yeah, that's probably good coaching there.
Thanks. Great to hear. I know I've talked with some people from Fairmarkit in the past. I've been very impressed with what you guys do, so I'm excited to kind of get some of your thoughts on this. As we dive into this, I want to throw a few numbers out to get started here. So, a Gartner survey recently found that 68% of chief procurement officers see the integration of AI and generative AI technology as a priority. 24% of them said it was their top priority. But interestingly, in that survey, they only found that 14% had fully implemented either of those technologies in their organizations, although I know there's a lot in the testing and pilot phase at this point. So can you talk, we talk a lot about AI. I mean, you can't go anywhere without a conversation about AI anymore in the industry. Can you kind of talk about what, at least on the surface, appears to maybe be a slow adoption of the technology in general, and kind of why, some reasons why it may look like that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the stats shock me. I would say from a Gen AI perspective, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
For AI, like AI has been around for a good amount of time now. So
Yeah.
I would actually expected more organizations to have leveraged AI in some different ways to full kind of implementation scale. Like the kind of way we've been seeing it is like Gen AI, I'd say for the last maybe like 24 months ago to maybe like 6 months ago, was still in the experimentation phase. People were still learning about it. People were doing a bunch of pilots, just trying to see like, all right, like how can we get our culture enabled on it and then start to bring in get a couple wins. I think it's out of that kind of phase now in the last probably 3 to 6 months. And now agentic has kind of entered that phase of being like heavy experimentation, not much true enterprise adoption. And I mean, if I was thinking about blockers, like why is that the case? I think there's a couple different ones, and it is across the whole organization. So like there's still, you have legal and IT that even for AI sometimes, like they're really putting up a ton of barriers and blockers and going through like 6-7 different assessments or tests you have to go through that get dragged out over like 3 to 6 months. So it's just like naturally going to block. You then have people that there's still the fear, whether it's AI or Gen AI, which we'll talk about the difference in a little bit, of just like the fear of losing their jobs or losing control. One of a quote I heard recently I loved is like, AI isn't going to take people's jobs. People using AI will take people's jobs. And I think that's like nail on the head. Then there's other ones too, like the normal ones around like complaining around bad data, which we can talk about later. And just like people trying to go too big, where everyone's thinking they hear AI, Gen AI. If they haven't demystified it, they're thinking like it's going to change the world overnight. And if you do that, you either get analysis paralysis or you never get started.
Yeah.
So that's where we do push people very heavily to say like let's just get incremental wins. Let's get a little bit better. And then as we do, we learn. Then we can start to take some bigger bets down the road as we built some internal kind of like win wires for the organization.
Yeah. I, I I love the whole AI is not going to take jobs. People using AI is going to take jobs. I love that phrase. That's great. Um, Before we get too far into this, though, I think, at least from my perspective, I imagine some of our audience as well needs to get an understanding as to what agentic AI really is. I think we've heard, I mean, 6 months ago, I didn't even know what agentic AI was, to be honest. I mean, everybody was talking about generative AI.
Mhm.
So can you kind of talk about what agentic AI is and how that kind of differs from more traditional AI models that maybe we're familiar with, um, and how they're kind of used in supply chain management?
Yeah, and I'll just throw a disclaimer. Like the word's getting tossed around way too much. Over the next 6 to 12 months, you'll hear people say agentic AI, AI agents, agentic
Mhm.
networks, agentic layers, agentic architecture. So like just get ready for a bunch of buzzwords. I think one way to do it, Brian, is to start to like breaking down like let's talk about the difference between AI and Gen AI.
Mhm.
So one way we like to describe it is like think of like a birthday cake with three layers. On the bottom layer, you have compute or you have data. So that's what you hear about like the NVIDIA, like GPUs. So it's okay. We have the data and then we have the infrastructure to run it. Now, on top of that, you have algorithms. That's like the middle layer of the cake. Now, with AI, you have algorithms that are programmed for predictable outputs. So much more structured. You know what you're going to get out of it. Now, with Gen AI, you have large language models. So these large language models, essentially think of them as like algorithms that you program to have unique or creative outputs. So it's less structured, it's less predictable, but it does kind of like deliver this new experience where it's not just like the set in stone, same answer every time. And it's been really, really exciting. I'd say the last like 12 to 18 months. But then on top of these large language models, you have the application layer. So that's like a Fairmarkit. You have different programs that sit on top and access those large language models. Now, when it comes to uh, agents, these agents now will sit on top. So think of an agent as an AI system that can run a task with minimal human supervision. So like think about it like a skilled coworker. And for these agents, you give them different tasks or you give them different instructions. They can then process the instruction. They can then take the action for you, and we'll talk about a bunch of examples. And that action could be within the same program. It could be across different tools that you already have set up, and then it learns from it. So like the argument that you see people making, and that we'll talk about a little bit later throughout this podcast, is it's not like there's going to be a world where people are going to have one agent. Like in reality, people are going to have 10, 20 agents. And then those agents will actually become business partners. So the big thing that people are talking about a lot now is okay, if you have these agents or this digital workforce, like how do they actually work together? So that's like the highest level if you think about AI to Gen AI then to agents, which once again there's going to have to be a lot of enablement on it because for a lot of people just hearing about it, it takes a little bit to get your arms around it, and that's where like visuals and exact examples typically do help out a lot.
Yep. So taking that thought just a step further, then maybe diving a little bit more. So is that that agent aspect? Is that what makes agentic AI different in a procurement situation than a more traditional AI usage?
Yeah, so like think about like a difference between like an agentic workflow and just like a normal workflow with Gen AI. So like a normal workflow with Gen AI, you might go to ChatGPT and say, write a paper on this topic. And whatever the topic is, it'll write the paper. It'll take a little bit of time, and then you can interact with it. So then you're giving it further like directions of how you want it refined. Where an agentic workflow, an example would be like write an outline on this topic, do some research, write a first draft, consider what needs to be revised, research that, and then rewrite it and continue that process. So you're giving it the instructions to then go take different actions. Now that those actions could also be to work with other agents. It could be to go to different tools. But you can kind of see how one is almost like a point in time. It requires a lot of human intervention, where the other one is it's limited human intervention. You have humans in the loop, but it can actually execute multi-step processes. It can adjust strategies, and then it can work alongside humans as it's doing that. So that's like think of it like a coworker versus like a tool.
that could have been so helpful to me in my sophomore year of high school trying to get through English,
Yeah,
right?
there's so many different use cases. Obviously, people kind of give it a little flack of like, oh, like is it going to be used negatively in certain ways? Where it kind of gets back to that quote I gave earlier, where it's like, no,
Yeah,
it's people that understand and get their arms around how to harness it and use it. Those would be the people, whether you're in the work environment or not, that are going to be able to get the real power of it.
yeah. So then, taking that, so can you talk about from in the procurement space, are there particular areas where agentic AI would make the most sense to be used?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
maybe some areas where maybe AI, just regular AI, is the more appropriate technology.
yeah, I'll give you a couple examples, and it'll be a little more specific to Fairmarkit, because we're an AI sourcing
Right.
platform. But there's different. We can talk about areas outside of Fairmarkit, even outside of procurement. But like some interesting ones for us. So it would be like drafting scopes of work. So Gen AI can help to if you give data different documents, Gen AI can help to put together a scope of work. But when it comes to actually having it access different tools, revising itself, refining it based off policies and procedures, really cool use case for agentic. Another interesting one is like reviewing the data quality. Say you want to set up a sourcing event. And right now, Gen AI could say, all right, we think based off of a lot of historical data that we have that's proprietary, we think that there's not enough information for a supplier to bid. So, like a very specific example. And it can identify that. But what it can't do is then take action on that. So, from an agentic standpoint, it can understand, okay, there's maybe not enough information. And then what does it do? It can actually go back and talk to a request or someone in the field, someone at a facility, clarify and make suggestions of, okay, this is what we think should how it should be amplified to make it better data quality. Is that correct? Can you give us your feedback? And it can operate in natural language. And then once that end user, say at that factory, at that location, confirms it, it can go back to that sourcing event, update it, and then pass it on to the next agent. So there's a lot of different use cases. Once again, think about like a task that can be carried out over time or multiple tasks. That's where agents usually come into play. It's a little less of like just a tool, which I think is more of like when you're thinking Gen AI, think as it's a tool, the agent is the multi-step process that you can run on top of it.
Yeah. So how explain to me then, how does as it is offering suggestions, alternatives, where are those ideas coming from for the agentic system? How are they coming up with options?
Yeah, I mean, it could be done in a couple different ways. One is how would a human do it? So you're talking about how would it clarify options from like a data quality standpoint?
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
where is it getting the idea? I mean, it has to get the idea from somewhere, right? I mean, it's we as humans just kind of pull it out of the air, right, if you will, you know.
Well,
So,
yeah. This is where it's like humans and technology working together. Because if you were a human, if you were to look at that and say you were to look at like, it's really tough to do across like tens of thousands of for us sourcing events. But if you're a human, what you'd probably do is you'd probably type it into Google, type it into someplace and say, okay, is this enough information where I can understand, say, what this part or what this service is? Where
mhm,
if I was like an outsider trying to submit a bid or a quote, is there enough information? So that's one thing that you could do. Now on the AI side, what you can actually do is so at Fairmarkit, because we do millions and millions of sourcing events, we have all the metadata of when a sourcing event goes out. What does the actual event look like in terms of the quality of the descriptions? And then we get to capture tens of millions of responses from suppliers to if they no bid and they said not enough information, then that's a really good data point. So then we can train models. So this is where you think more about like there's generalist models, which are more models that can ask it any question under the sun. You could ask it like, what day was September 14th, 1884? And you could also ask it about XYZ random topic. We focus much more on being like domain specific. So we'll train this specific functionality to say like, all right, based off the millions of sourcing events, when something looks like this historically, based off our data, suppliers don't have enough information. So then that will trigger to say, okay, let's do some more research to figure out how do we enhance this. So it is kind of both. And you got to think about on like what can the power of AI do to help, and then what would a human do in this situation, and then you mold those two together, and that's where you can start to have some pretty cool magic.
yeah. So can you have some real world examples of some of this? I mean, you've kind of talked about areas that can be used and whatnot. I mean, are there actually real world examples that this is is in place today and being used?
Yeah, absolutely. So like a obvious one I think a lot of people could probably get their minds around is negotiations. So say a company wants to negotiate with a supplier, you can actually give instructions to a negotiations agent to
Mhm.
say, this is what I'm trying to optimize for. You can say, and that could be price, that could be lead time, payment terms. There's a lot of different like options, and then you can also give it instructions of this is how I want you to operate. So it could be I want you to operate with this tonality in this way. You can also give context about the supplier you're looking to negotiate with. So you essentially give this agent a bunch of information, and then it will go and it can engage with those suppliers. And maybe just not one, you could do 50 at once, you could do 10 at once, and go out and look to try to get to that best value using different strategies. Now, on top of it, if you can train that agent with best practices when it comes to negotiation, that aren't things that say Fairmarkit will come up with, but they're things that a lot of people already have in their organization. They're just not being put to use. So it's pretty cool where you can kind of see it really come to life and see people interacting with it. But I think for us, in terms of like our customers, when we're really starting the agentic conversations, we really go back to like first principles around like what are the jobs to be done. So like you think about in sourcing, like what are the jobs to be done? So managing open sourcing events. So that would be like you send a sourcing event out to a bunch of different suppliers. What does a human do today? They look at the event. Okay, do people have questions and messages? So can you build an agent to help out with that? Um, do they need to send a follow-up note to all the different suppliers because they found out they were missing information? Do they need to go award it at a certain time? So like that's a really interesting one to have an agent around. Now, what are actions that like should be taken but that are not? There's a lot of different customers we're working with that know they should be doing more risk checks. They know they should be having suppliers fill out questionnaires proactively. They're just not doing it. So that's one of those areas where it's like you could use agents not just to make people more efficient and more effective, but then to also do jobs that you just don't have the bandwidth to do. And that's where you can start building some pretty cool use cases and like business cases around not just cost savings, time savings, operational, but actually how do you like help out with compliance adherence and de-risking what you're actually purchasing. So there's a
Yep.
bunch of different examples. I'm happy to give some for outside fair markets world as well.
Yeah, and maybe we can do that in just a minute. But you mentioned some of the advantages there, it- and I want to get a little more into some of the advantages of using agentic AI because I think one of the concerns that companies always have when adopting a new technology or even looking at a new technology, from the boardroom perspective, it's what's the ROI on that, right? What am I going to save? What are the benefits I'm going to get? So, can you talk about some of those benefits that are out there with agentic AI, maybe versus some of the other technologies where you may be pitching an agentic AI solution, another competitor may be pitching something else.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the fundamentals of it don't change from any other technology. You're looking at what's the before and after.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are looking at how do we measure our department today? Like, what are the KPIs? And then how does this change by bringing it in? So, like, there's all the normal ones around like the compliance adherence, there's the risk reduction, cycle time reduction. There's like how many sourcing events did we do? How many of the sourcing events had ESG suppliers invited? What's the NPS of using the platform? The new ones I think, and this is all so new, Brian. So like, I just want to like call it out.
Yeah.
Because for anyone that's saying like, oh, we have the roadmap for agentic and how we measure everything, you hear like Bill McDermott from ServiceNow talking about it, Mark Benioff from Salesforce, like it's all still new. But I think there will be some new like cool KPIs around how are you goaling your teams and your departments, and it could be around like number of agents created. So it's like, are we actually just creating and adopting it? And then it's going to be how effective are those agents or those agentic networks, the agents that are working together. So I do think there's gonna be some cool new KPIs around like maybe like what's the like an agentic score for a person or a department. So it's like how many FTEs is your agentic network equal to? Because then that starts to talk about like additional throughput and throttling of like individual people. And in a world where efficiency right now is king, it's just a really cool narrative to start to think about that we can get to pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation around teaching the people what they actually can do with it. Last year, and I don't remember who did the survey, but I had read a survey that supply chain managers had been, I don't know, X number of thousands of them had surveyed, and roughly like 70% of them said that they're very happy with all this technology that's being added. The problem is that they don't know what to do with it, right? And so before a company goes and adds more technology, like help us with the technology we have. So I think this is kind of the same way, right? I mean, it's one thing for a CEO to say, hey, let's bring in agentic AI. It's another thing to make sure that the people who get access to it know what to do with it.
Yeah, I'll challenge you a little bit on that overall, and I agree with you. But in terms of that would be still think of like bundling, I think, agentic with Gen AI.
Hmm.
Because for a lot of companies, they set up a Gen AI, they set up a strategy. They bring in a tech, they bring in a provider, whatever it is, that they build it in house. And a lot of times that's built by the innovation team, the digital team, by IT, the executive mandates, whatever it is. And then it's pushed on people to say, go use this tech,
Yeah.
which like sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't. What's interesting about agentic is it's actually a layer sitting almost in between your people and your tech. So the whole idea is how you can make it more effective and efficient to operate and to work on those underlying platforms. And what's also really cool about agentic is, and this is not like completely confirmed because it's still kind of up in the air, but I don't think that we're going to see a world where like IT or digital team is going out and creating all these agents. Like they could set the strategy for how agentic networks work together, so how agents talk to each other. But I do think it's going to be democratized where individual people in the plant, at the facility, in the location, out in the field, whatever it is, they're the ones that will sit down with a framework and say, okay, here's the work I'm doing today. And then they'll build, to be self-service agents for themselves to help to
Okay.
do their work. So from that perspective, you should see a better adoption because people are building it for themselves as opposed to someone that has no idea what's actually happening at the ground level saying, go use this.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That I think that's just
So
that's
so
what we're thinking.
it'd be more user driven.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Which is going to create its own challenges. Because like think about like SaaS sprawl, where like users can go out like all different departments buying their own SaaS, and now people have more SaaS than employees of their companies. Or like even in the for people that were kind of like involved in like the data center, the virtualization world, you have something called virtual machine sprawl, which is like anyone could spin up a virtual machine. So you just had like tons of them. So I think we're gonna hit the same challenge with agents, but it's a solvable problem.
Yeah. So I want to talk, I'm going to ask you a question about the topic that I think is on everybody's mind these days, and that's disruptions in supply chain. We have a lot of things going on. We have geopolitical concerns that seem to be ramping up. There are a lot of tariff talks. Labor continues to be an issue for a lot of companies. Um, does this technology, does agentic AI offer any hope in mitigating any of this in any way? Is it can it be geared towards mitigating kind of disruption or preparing for disruptions in any way?
Short answer, yes. Um, I think it's like this is a really interesting problem for people to get their arms around. Where like there's like we're big fans that it's really cool to take off tactical work for
Mhm.
people so they don't have to do like redundant manual tasks so they can free themselves up to work on things like this, which is like all right, like how do we best position ourselves for all this like volatility in the macro market and economy. So like the what we kind of push people on is like, all right, how can AI, Gen AI or agents help to like partner with you on it? So like one area that's typically beyond human scale for people is just how do you keep your arms around your supply base if you have
Mhm.
10,000, 50,000 suppliers and in real time understand is there new articles that are coming out? Is everyone up to speed from their I brought up earlier, their questionnaires, like the risk assessments? So you can actually have agents doing all that in real time, working individually with the suppliers and checking a lot of different sites and tools to
Mhm.
make sure you have that information in real time and then deliver to you actions that need to be taken where risks identified. So like that's an interesting one. I think AI in general, you asked the difference between like what's better for AI versus Gen AI versus agents.
Yeah.
We found at Fairmarkit, AI is the best right now for supplier identification to
Okay.
understand, okay, when you have a certain um, whether it's a subcategory based off UNSPSC codes or specific purchase, then can you actually identify who are the highest likelihood suppliers to be able to provide that good or service at the optimal value? So like diversifying your supply base and not getting stuck with just like one or two suppliers for something that's very critical to your business obviously helps a lot when you're talking about like tariffs and different geopolitical concerns. And then the final one I'll throw out there is like Gen AI is actually really good for simulations and scenario planning. So giving it a ton of different inputs, and it could be different documents, it could be different Excel spreadsheets of different kind of assessments you've run in the past, to giving it all that information, running the simulation for you, and then allowing you to actually engage with it and ask questions. So a short answer,
Yeah.
yes, but it's not like a hey, here's like your silver bullet, figure it out. It's going to be how
Yeah.
can the team partner with, how can the tech partner with you?
But I think the biggest, as much as anything, the biggest thing probably is the amount of time that is being saved in these other tasks that the technology can do. that frees you up to maybe focus on the more time-consuming tasks that you may
For,
have from a risk mitigation standpoint.
For sure. And
Yeah,
then it's going to be, once again, even if you knew, like we have so many customers that know that they should be doing things
yeah,
with their supply base to keep it up to date, to understand in real time, but it just, they can't. It just takes way too much time. They would have to hire a team of 30 people. If you can do that with technology, and then you're just focusing on like the most critical or where there's the highest risk, that's a really cool use case of like people partnering with AI.
yeah. Um, Two of the big concerns around AI in general has always been data quality and human oversight, right? So the AI can only use the data it has available to it in some way, right? So if that data that you have is bad, you're going to get an AI suggestion that maybe is not the best suggestion, right? And then, of course, there's always the human oversight that everybody wants to talk about, which is, well, who's watching the AI and making sure that the AI is not canceling suppliers on you, right?
Mhm.
Does agentic AI does it alter the equation in any of those things, or are those things still just as important in agentic AI usage as they are in more traditional AI?
I would say human oversight is way more important. I'd say data quality, and we'll touch on it, is always like it's always the thing that people bring up no matter what you're using. And that's
Yeah,
not just like agentic AI, that's literally anything. So like human oversight, if you think about you have these agents now, so these coworkers to say you're giving instructions to, they're acting autonomously, so they're carrying out the task. Ideally, they're bringing you and you're setting it up so they're bringing you human in the loop into the fold or into the loop before they make a high impact decision.
yeah.
So that could be updating a PO. That could be like doing something that is difficult to reverse from a supplier. That could be actually making a purchase, whatever it is. So like that's one thing of being able to like get in the loop when it's a high impact. But that being said, you do need to have the oversight and set up the policies around it to see just like what's it doing, how's it making decisions, and then try to understand. All right, where do we think there could be risk? Then how do I have different kind of stopgaps to check it? So like even outside the world of fair market and procurement, you see this with people with like recruiting, where they're using AI and Gen AI, and it'll be agents soon to help out with like the recruiting process. Like as
Mhm.
candidates come in, review the candidates, understand is it a match. If it's a match, then to set up, provide email intro with the hiring manager and the person. It's like really cool use case for AI and Gen AI. That being said, if the underlying model has a bias towards XYZ group or against XYZ group, then like you need to know that, you need to be able to catch that so that that doesn't have that inherent bias built into it. So like there's definitely some areas that you really need to have your arms around. And I'd say this would be one of the main concerns people might have is like until we have a really good way to figure out how to really understand all the autonomous work that's happening, especially if you're giving it more autonomy, then like that's a risk. And then data quality. I don't know, Brian, what's your take? Data quality, like, is it something that it's the age old 30 or 40-year-old thing that people are going to keep bringing up, or like, is it a fair response to not adopting new tech in your view?
I don't think it's a reason not to adopt new tech, but I think it's a process that companies don't spend enough time dealing with before they adopt the tech, right? And I guess
Mm.
my fear is that, you know, as people rush to adopt AI, right, because it was the hot thing to do, that they didn't fix the data problems. And 5 years from now, because the AI learns from the decisions it makes, right? It makes a decision. You say, oh, that's a good decision. That's a bad decision, right? And as in a simplistic form, obviously, but 5 years from now, you've made a series of decisions, some of which were good, some of which were bad. But the AI just, because you keep going with these decisions, and now it's making a decision based on bad decisions from 5 years ago, and that really worries me. As I guess just as a person, right? Right,
Mhm.
that we're going to end up with bad things, and I can see a scenario at some point in the near future where some company in their quarterly earnings announces a huge earnings miss and they blame it on the AI, right? I mean, that's going to be the excuse. It's like, well, the AI, we made decisions based on the AI and the AI was bad, right? And it just kind of glosses over the fact that it's because the AI was making the decision on data that really wasn't good,
What's
you know?
sad in that example is just because they said AI and Gen AI, their stock might go up.
Yeah,
Because there's so many triggers that are built to say like, oh, are they talking about Gen AI and agents? And
yeah.
that's you see every public announcement has it. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I understand your point. Um, I kind of view it as like I'm not a believer in like, oh, we can't start a project, and I know you're not saying this
Yep.
without better data. I think that there's a world where like, yeah, like do you do point in time like cleanups of your data for sure, and that's going to help out.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of like if you have the same process, same platforms, and same people, you're not making any changes. Of course, your data is going to be bad forever. Well, like there's no like you're not changing anything to address it. So our view and my view is like change your process or your platforms or your people, whatever it is, to set yourselves up so in 3, 6, 12 months from now, your data is in a better spot. It's more structured. You can harness it more. So like it's one of those things that's like start from
I,
today, look forward versus just trying to like fix every problem of the past.
yeah, I mean, yes, I would agree with that. I just, and you would know this better than I would, because you deal with these companies on a daily basis on these topics. But I just wonder how many companies are actually going back and fixing it, and you know, they may be using it as an excuse not to adopt it, or they may just be adopting it with the assumption that the adoption of the AI is going to fix the past problems.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll
Right.
give you a real time example where trying to think of a good one here. So like people will complain a lot about their the quality of their rec to PO data. You pull a PO report or your requisitions,
Hmm.
so purchase requisitions, and the data is just like one or two words, and someone just puts that in, so it's impossible to categorize, or maybe everyone always hits other for the category because they're going through manual process and they're like, doesn't matter, doesn't impact me, I'm hitting other, versus going through all the different categories.
Yep.
So fast forward to a world today where people can, instead of just giving that crappy response into the purchase requisition, type it into an AI solution. So it's like from Fairmarkit, we do this. So you can prompt what you're looking for. We will then ask clarifying questions based off the Gen AI. So we tie into large language models to ask very domain specific clarifying questions that allow us to capture enough information to then correctly categorize that what subcategory based off the customer's categories, what the purchase is. We can then send it out so we get better responses back from suppliers because they know what it actually is. And then when that cuts over to a purchase requisition, so ready to make the purchase, we have a lot cleaner data. We have the actual category, subcategory for the customer. And then now we actually even competitively bid out. So we got to a better value. And then that is what kind of gets cut over to the purchase order. So now when you do your PO reports in the future, it has very clean data. You know, it's
Hmm.
optimized from a price perspective, and you have the correct subcategories or very close. So like that's an example where you just start now and then a year out, your 12-month look back on data will be very clean. So just
Yeah.
just an example of one, obviously specific to our world, but that we're excited about.
Yeah. And that actually, I mean, want to get two more questions in here in the few minutes we have left, and that probably is a nice segue to the question that I had coming up anyway, which was the idea that, like a year ago, everybody was talking about Gen AI and like trying to adopt it. Now it's Agentic AI. And I guess my question to you, and I think I know what the answer is based on that the last couple minutes of the conversation here, but um, should companies be investing in Agentic AI today, or because this technology, AI in general, is just changing so fast, is it better to kind of take a wait and see approach? How do they address that concept, that they're not adopting a technology that is out of date in a year? Right? How do we know that agentic AI is not going to be out of date?
I mean, I think what we call it will be outdated in a year, and it will be different. I don't know if next year they're going to be called like, oh, are you using super agents or like Gen 2 agents? I have no idea what it's going to be, but the rate of innovation is continuing to exponentially grow. So like I do think it's fair there'll be something else next year. That doesn't mean that you can just go from 0 to 10 overnight.
Hmm.
So it's like you have to start. You have to like get the culture set up for it. You have to get your team set up for it. You have to get the right people on the bus that actually want to learn about it. And then and maybe you're always one generation behind. So maybe you're not the ones that are the first 5 or 10% to adopt Agents 2.0, whatever that is. But you're starting to get the value of Gen AI, of agents. You're building out the muscle. Because like you fast forward 4 or 5 years, eventually being 2 or 3 years behind the rest of the industry is going to be like night and day. It's
Yeah.
not going to be like it is today, where it's like, are you using Gen AI or not? Like, it's going to be a massive business opportunity or a business miss if you don't. So, like, I kind of coach people up on, like, we've seen this in other areas. You've seen this on, like, the journey to the public cloud, where you didn't go from, like, having your workloads sit on these big servers uh, to just, like, cool, it's at AWS overnight. Like you went from that to setting up your own cloud at your own data center. And then you went from that to moving some applications over or some workloads over. And then eventually now it makes sense that you're there. But there's a lot of companies that were like 5 or 10 years behind, and that hurt them a lot from an agility perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, it's okay. You don't have to be the leader in everything, right? And there's a lot of companies out there that are more than happy to let somebody else take the lead and work through the issues, because anytime a new technology comes out, there's always some issues that have to be worked through.
For sure.
And there's a lot of companies out there that are more than happy to be that second generation of users, if you will.
Yeah, but once again, you have to start in some way because you have to build
Yeah.
the muscle, demystify it. And like my view is in the future, like you're gonna have just truly autonomous departments.
Yeah.
So you have departments that are built of agents working together, and the jobs just change. Like the job changes from actually operationally like carrying out a bunch of tasks to you're more in the strategy of setting up like what the tasks are going to look like. So it's gonna change the way that people interact with their in their jobs.
Yep. And that leads nicely to the last question I want to get in, kind of a advice question, if you will, for the companies that want to make that leap that maybe haven't done it yet. Can you kind of offer some advice or maybe a framework or whatever for adopting agentic AI, and how do they start about it? How do they think about getting started in it?
Yeah. So I'd say it's still like not proven in terms of like what's the best way to deploy it at scale. So I don't want to pretend like I have the answers there.
Yeah.
From what we've seen, just like from adopting other tech, whether it's Gen AI, ML, RPA, is you don't go like super wide right off the bat.
Hmm.
You identify like from a impact, from an effort perspective, where might be some cool use cases. You look at like what jobs are being done today. It's like what are people actually doing, and then
Yeah.
pick one or two. So like I have a call later today with one of our customers that we had a call with maybe about 5 customers last week, and we just brainstormed some different agentic workflows that we could build out. We narrowed it down to two, and then today we're going to talk for an hour about one. And we're just going to go really deep of like what's actually happening today, like what are people doing, what are they not doing that you'd like them to do, what tools are they actually using, and then as we identify that entire flow and process, cool, let's build out our first like agentic network with them where we have one agent that works with the end users and one agent that works with the tools. They work together, and like that, and then you just bring that to life,
Yeah.
because then they can then go and take that back to their organization and say, okay, here's V1. You demystify it. You show the value, even if the impact isn't massive, it's still like a meaningful impact. And then people start saying, oh, I could do it for this, I could do it for this, I could do it for this. And like that's cool. But once again, what that's gonna lead to is agent sprawl, which is why like that agentic architecture and having that set up in the right way, I think that's the future problem for us to all solve.
Yep. I mean, in the end, right, you can't benefit from the technology if you don't start using the technology
And
in,
it's
in some
like
ways.
you gotta maybe like use it in your personal life, like to go out. It's the large like large language models. They've now offered solutions like once again I brought up OpenAI Operator earlier. So Operator allows you just to build an agent or build multiple agents at once. So it's kind of cool just to try it out, like have fun with it, play around with it, and then that will spark some creativity. That if you then bring that back to your team at work, it sets you up for a pretty cool career path, I think.
Yeah, very exciting time with it. So thank you, Kevin. We're out of time. Before we go, do you want to pass along some information to the audience on how they might get in touch with Fairmarkit if they want to learn how to use AI in their organization?
Yeah, honestly, we love to have just different like we call them jam sessions where we just brainstorm with people, throw ideas around, try to figure out what's is it doesn't make sense to engage right now. Feel free just to ping me on LinkedIn. So just Kevin Frechette, I'm sure will be in the post here, and would love to meet with anyone. Once again, just to bounce ideas around. Always fun.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate the conversation today, Kevin. It was great.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for having me on, Brian.
So, we are out of time. I want to thank my guest today, Kevin Frechette of Fairmarkit, and all of you who took time out of your day to listen to us today. We greatly appreciate it and the support. A new episode of Talking Supply Chain comes out on Thursday. You can find it on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts, so be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, this is Brian Straight, and you've been listening to Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.